What if I told you that the key to solving one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century was deliberately lost? I am talking about the personal diaries of the last Russian emperor, Nicholas II. Dozens of notebooks, written in his own hand, provided a meticulous chronicle of the royal family's life in exile in Tobolsk, Siberia. But it was there, on the eve of the final act of the drama, that the traces of the most important and perhaps most candid entries came to an abrupt end. Where did these priceless pages disappear to? Were they destroyed to hide the terrible truth, or are they still being kept secret, waiting for their moment to come? Today, we set out in search of the missing diaries to try to unravel a mystery that still intrigues historians. What began as a relatively peaceful stay gradually turned into a life under increasing pressure. It was spring, but for the Romanovs it brought no renewal, only a sense of impending change. In August of that same year, with revolutionary sentiment growing and the threat to the family's safety increasing, the provisional government decided to move them. Their destination was distant Tobolsk, a small town in western Siberia, which was to become their temporary refuge. The move was carried out with the utmost secrecy to avoid unwanted attention and possible unrest. Accompanied by a large entourage, including servants, doctors, and loyal servants, the royal family set off on their journey. The journey took several days, with trains traveling slowly over vast distances. Nicholas II, who had kept a diary since his youth, made entries during this period. As before, his notes were concise but reflected the events taking place. He noted details of everyday life, the weather, the children's activities, and meetings with the guards. For him, the diary was not so much a historical document as a means of self-discipline, a record of everyday events. However, despite the apparent ordinariness of the entries, they became an invaluable source of information about the life of the royal family during those tragic months. The very fact that he kept a diary during such a difficult time testifies to Nicholas II's desire to maintain some semblance of order and meaning in the chaos of a changing world. Although forced, the arrival in Tobolsk was initially perceived as a respite, an opportunity to find relative peace. The family was housed in the former governor's mansion, which Nicholas II referred to as his future home in his diary entry dated August 13, 1917. In the first months of exile, as the emperor himself noted, "We are well here. It is very quiet." However, this tranquility proved deceptive, a harbinger of far harsher trials. The autumn of 1917 brought with it not only the first cold winds and the first snowdrifts in Tobolsk, but also the coldness of the inevitable isolation and uncertainty for the royal family. The realization that life had changed fundamentally gradually dawned on Nicholas II and his loved ones. In his diary, he recorded the smallest details, from the weather outside the window to the mood of his family members, trying to preserve at least a fragment of his familiar world. The house where they lived, a former governor's mansion, became both a prison and the last refuge of a great dynasty. Inside, the royal family tried to maintain order and harmony, despite the pressure from the outside world. Alexei, their young heir, continued to struggle with hemophilia, which caused much anxiety and concern. Medical procedures and doctors' recommendations became an integral part of their daily life. Nicholas II carefully recorded the course of his son's treatment and condition, as well as his fears and hopes in his diary. News from outside Tobolsk reached them with a delay, but became a source of anxiety and reflection. The political situation in Russia was becoming increasingly tense. The provisional government was losing control, and the influence of the workers' and soldiers' councils was growing. The Bolsheviks were gradually strengthening their positions. All this echoed in Nicholas II's soul with pain and anxiety for the future of the country. His diary entries during this period are filled with a complex web of personal experiences and historical events. As a master of concise but expressive commentary, he gives us an insight into the state of mind of the last Tsar. Despite the difficult circumstances, he retained hope for the preservation of dignity and faith in a better future. Although his understanding of the impending catastrophe became increasingly clear. The royal family, isolated and under constant surveillance, continued to live within these walls, which preserved the memory of former times when Russia was a vast empire. The servants maintained a warm atmosphere and kept the house cozy, creating the illusion of a normal life for their masters. This contrast between the small comforts of home and the great storm outside its walls made their lives both tragic and deeply human. Nicholas II's reflections on the fate of the monarchy in Russia occupy a special place in his diary. He watched the developments with apprehension, trying to understand whether order and stability could be restored. The internal dialogue with himself that the Tsar conducts in his diary reflects the complexity of the situation and the depth of the tragedy of the era. Overall, the autumn months in Tobolsk were a very difficult period for the Romanov dynasty, filled with anxiety, illness, and anticipation of the unknown. These months are reflected in the pages of the diary, which became a kind of scroll of the emotional experiences of the last Russian emperor. The winter of 1917 and 1918 was harsh and unforgiving for the Romanov family. The frosts grew stronger, and the north winds pierced the walls of the house in Tobolsk, where the last royal family had now settled. These cold days were accompanied not only by physical hardship, but also by growing psychological pressure. With each passing day, it became clearer that the reign of the Tsars was coming to an end, but also that the new era would be cruel and full of trials. Life under arrest was complicated by constant visits from the Bolshevik authorities and local representatives. Frequent searches, which were often accompanied by the confiscation of belongings, including documents. On the night of January 26, 1918, the house was searched, and Nikolai II described what was happening in his diary with particular caution. These events became a turning point that heightened the anxiety and foreboding of the coming tragedy. The diaries of that time, as evidenced by historical archives and eyewitness accounts, preserved the shadows of everyday life and the oppressive atmosphere of exile. One of the greatest mysteries is that some of these materials later disappeared without a trace. A number of scholars are convinced that the loss of the diaries was not accidental but caused by political or other motives that remained hidden from the public. The records of Nicholas II that have survived to this day are only fragments, some of which may have been censored or destroyed. Relations between the family and their guards became increasingly tense. The Bolsheviks who arrived tightened the regime, which affected all aspects of life. Despite his deteriorating health, Nicholas II tried to keep his family's spirits up, strengthen their bonds, and get ready for the inevitable. At the same time, he quietly kept a diary, which was maybe his last spiritual refuge, and a way to remember what was happening. Nicholas II's inner world, his thoughts and fears, as expressed in the pages of his diary, help us understand not only the personality of the last monarch, but also the complex historical era that ended in tragedy for the entire dynasty. This period in Tobolsk, marked by increased external pressure and internal strife, left a deep mark on history, and the diaries remain a key, albeit incomplete, testimony to those events. The spring of 1918 brought changes that would forever alter the fate of the Romanov dynasty. The family was transported from Tobolsk to Yekaterinburg, accompanied by guards and representatives of the Soviet authorities. This move, which began on May 12, 1918, was another stage in their tragic journey. In this new prison, the Ipatiev house, the life of the royal family became even more restricted, and their connection with the outside world was virtually cut off. Nicholas II's diaries, if they still existed in their entirety, remained the main evidence of a bygone era. Numerous events and mysteries are associated with the move, including those concerning the fate of Nicholas II's diaries. Some believe that some of the documents were confiscated or lost during transport, and it is possible that some were destroyed. At the same time, the family tried to maintain the rare order and mutual understanding that remained, despite the tightening of the regime and the collapse of their former hopes. Life in Yekaterinburg was imprisonment, in the truest sense of the word. The Romanov family was placed in the Ipatiev house, which later became a symbol of their tragedy. The last months were filled with fear and anticipation of the inevitable. If diaries were still being kept, they probably became rare and brief notes reflecting fear, pain, and hope in particularly dark times. During these months, Nicholas II continued to record only the most general moments, avoiding details that could endanger his family or become compromising evidence in the hands of their captors. Documents and evidence from that period indicate that during the transfer from Tobolsk, the diaries may have been confiscated by Soviet authorities or lost as a result of secret operations. Versions differ. Some believe that the diaries are kept in secret archives, while others consider them irretrievably lost. This loss has become one of the key issues for historians trying to reconstruct the truth about the last days of the royal family. The absence of complete and continuous records during this critical period raises the most questions and fuels theories about deliberate removal or destruction. The last entries in the diaries cover the moments when the family was already under heavy guard and experiencing increasingly harsh restrictions. These documents, imbued with the spirit of the time, are not only historical evidence, but also an emotional chronicle of human suffering and despair. The history of these diaries is interrupted just before the culmination of the tragedy, which makes their disappearance even more sinister. After the death of Nicholas II and his family, the fate of their personal documents, including their diaries, became particularly mysterious. Traces of their diaries were lost in the chaos of the subsequent years of civil war and the establishment of Soviet power. One of the most common assumptions is that the diaries were confiscated by the Soviet authorities and sent to state archives. But a thorough study of the archival funds does not provide a clear answer as to whether these materials have been preserved in their entirety. Historians and archivists have found only fragments or copies of the diaries, and the originals are often referred to as irretrievably lost. Another version suggests that some of the diaries were destroyed for political reasons to prevent Nicholas II's personal notes from being used for ideological purposes. There are also versions about the secret removal of the diaries and their concealment by individuals in order to preserve historical memory. These various hypotheses only add to the mystery surrounding the fate of these valuable historical documents. This topic has given rise to much speculation, conspiracy theories, and legends that have no documentary evidence. At the same time, historians strive to separate facts from fiction, assessing reality on the basis of archival data and eyewitness accounts. The fate of the diaries remains one of the mysteries of 20th century Russian history, reflecting the complex, tragic, and multifaceted process of transition from empire to Soviet power. The search for answers to these questions continues to this day, as each new discovery or study may shed light on this part of history. Documentarians and researchers around the world continue to analyze the smallest details, hoping to find the missing pieces that could reconstruct the complete picture. Thus, the question of the disappearance of Nicholas II's diaries from Tobolsk is not simply a question of the whereabouts of old records. It is part of a broader mystery surrounding the final days of the Russian Empire, the fate of its monarch, and the complex process of forming a new state system. Each fragment found, each new version, adds depth and complexity to this historical puzzle, forcing us to rethink the events of the past again and again. In the post-revolutionary years, the fate of Nicholas II's personal belongings and documents, including his diaries, remained unclear and uncertain. After the tragic death of the royal family in 1918, the Soviet authorities took control of all property left behind by the monarchy, including personal documents, diaries, notes, letters, and photographs. However, historical events and the ensuing chaos of the Civil War led to many pages of history being lost or destroyed. There is no accurate data on the total volume of archival materials that have survived to this day, nor on the completeness of Nicholas II's diaries. Historians often encounter contradictory information, as well as incomplete sources and lost fragments, which create gaps in the overall picture of events. Although some of the archives are kept in state institutions, there are many mysteries and ambiguities that encourage researchers to continue their search. Ideological factors had a particular influence on the fate of the diaries. Soviet propaganda and official historical reports often avoided the topic of Nicholas II's personal life, seeking to portray him as an unsuccessful ruler or a tyrant, which could have led to the deliberate destruction of records that could arouse sympathy or cause other inconveniences for the new regime. The diaries thus became not only historical documents, but also the subject of ideological struggle between supporters of different versions of the past. At the center of political conflict, these records faced problems of authenticity and preservation. Nevertheless, they remain an important source for understanding the inner world of the last Russian emperor and the era of his reign. Many modern historians and archivists continue to search for missing pages and intact texts of the diaries. With the hope of finding new information and archival materials, they strive to reveal the truth more fully and lift the veil of mystery surrounding the fate of the Tsar's documents. Each discovery sheds light on unique aspects of history and helps to restore lost fragments, making the picture of the past more complete and accurate. The impact of the loss of Nicholas II's diaries on our perception of history cannot be overstated. These unique documents could be the key to a deeper understanding of the internal processes that took place at the heart of the monarchy during its collapse. The Tsar's personal notes reflect not only the political situation, but also human experiences, fears, hopes, and doubts. Without them, we are deprived of a significant part of the mosaic that makes the picture of those events complete, multidimensional, and vivid. The absence of the diaries has a significant impact on public consciousness, literature, cinema, and other cultural spheres. The image of Nicholas II is often shaped by the lack of complete historical evidence, which opens up a wide space for speculation, interpretation, and mythologization. This contributes to the formation of various legends and theories, which, although far from objective, often contain elements of truth and reflect historical reality. The loss of the diaries has stimulated an active search for alternative sources of information. Eyewitness accounts, letters, official documents, newspaper publications, and other artifacts of the time. These materials help to reconstruct the chronicle of the last years of Nicholas II's life, but always with a degree of uncertainty and subjectivity. Scholars strive for scientific objectivity and to separate reliable facts from speculation. But without the diaries, there remains a significant gap in the historical picture. At the same time, this gap contributes to the development of historical fantasy and creative interpretations. Artists, writers, and filmmakers fill in the gaps in documentary evidence with artistic images, forming a complex, albeit not always accurate, portrait of the era and personality of the last Russian emperor. This sociocultural phenomenon reflects society's need to understand complex historical processes through the prism of personal stories. Thus, the loss of Nicholas II's diaries is not just a historical loss, but also a challenge for the whole of culture and science. It encourages a constant search for truth, a rethinking of the past, and a deep analysis of the events of the early 20th century, shaping our contemporary historical memory and identity. In the last decades of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, interest in Nicholas II's diaries and the fate of his family has been revived. New research, publications, and exhibitions dedicated to the life of the last Russian emperor and the tragic events he experienced have appeared. Scholars, historians, and cultural studies experts are actively studying these materials to gain a deeper understanding of Nicholas II's personality and the complex era he represented. Modern methods of document analysis, including digital technologies, allow researchers to restore damaged pages, decipher difficult-to-read text, and verify the authenticity of sources. These technological innovations open up new opportunities for studying historical materials that were previously considered inaccessible or lost. Criticism of false theories and myths surrounding the diaries and personality of the last emperor plays an important role in promoting an objective understanding of history. The cultural perception of Nicholas II and his reign is gradually changing from one-sided assessments to a more balanced and humane view. Works of art, films, and literature seek to show the multifaceted and contradictory nature of the Tsar's personality, his internal conflicts and dilemmas, as well as the complexity of the historical situation in which he found himself. Despite significant progress in the study of the subject, the question of the disappearance and fate of the diaries remains open and continues to attract keen interest. Each new discovery, publication, or analysis adds details to the historical portrait, making it more accurate and complex. Major book festivals and academic conferences regularly feature presentations of new research and publications, demonstrating the continuing revival of memory and public interest. Thus, the topic of Nicholas II's diaries remains relevant and important, not only for historians, but also for a wide audience, reflecting society's eternal quest to understand the past and preserve historical memory. The future of Nicholas II's diaries remains uncertain, but modern researchers are determined to uncover all the secrets associated with these unique documents. Thanks to advances in archival technology, digital restoration, and artificial intelligence, new opportunities are emerging for restoring lost and damaged pages and analyzing the authenticity of existing materials. International cooperation between archival institutions and research centers is becoming the key to success in the search for new sources. Joint projects and information exchange are helping to speed up the process of finding and organizing archival documents related to the life and reign of Nicholas II. Private collections and organizations that support the preservation of historical heritage and provide access to documents also play an important role. Nevertheless, questions remain unresolved regarding the origin of a number of documents and their legal status. Not all archives are open to the public, and some are kept secret, giving rise to new assumptions and speculation among researchers and the general public. These circumstances only fuel interest and the desire to get to the bottom of the truth. In light of these challenges, historians and archivists continue their work with unwavering enthusiasm, striving to reconstruct the full picture of events and understand the depth of the personality of Russia's last emperor. Successes in research are bringing us closer to uncovering the fate of the diaries and other documents that will help us more accurately assess this historical era and its consequences. Research continues to this day, and new discoveries are not long in coming. The future of Nicholas II's diaries is not only a hope for the complete restoration of historical truth, but also an important stage in understanding Russia's past and shaping the national identity and historical memory of the people. One of the most difficult and confusing obstacles in studying Nicholas II's diaries is the question of their authenticity and possible falsification. For decades, since the first publications, there have been heated debates and discussions among historians, archivists, and graphologists about the extent to which the records that have come down to us truly reflect the thoughts and experiences of the last Russian emperor. In journalism and even in academic circles, bold theories have periodically emerged and continue to emerge about forgeries, ideological edits, and even deliberate distortions of the text introduced into the historical record with specific goals. Such doubts did not arise out of thin air. First and foremost, they were fueled by the political context in which the diaries were kept, studied, and published. After the revolution and the murder of the royal family, all their personal belongings, including their archives, fell into the hands of the new authorities, who had every opportunity to manipulate the documents. Some revisionist researchers have suggested that certain fragments of the diaries, especially those that portrayed the Tsar in an unfavorable, passive, or Philistine light, may have been deliberately altered or even completely fabricated to reinforce the public image of an insignificant and narrow-minded ruler who was inevitably overthrown by the people. These theories sparked serious and lengthy debates about the need for an extremely critical approach to sources and the mandatory verification of all controversial materials using the most modern methods of scientific expertise. It is important to emphasize that, despite waves of such doubts, the overwhelming majority of authoritative scholars in Russia and abroad recognize the enormous historical value and, for the most part, the authenticity of the diaries. There are unique, repeatedly confirmed entries that were recorded personally by Nicholas II. They reflect not only the key historical events that he witnessed and participated in, but also his deeply personal, inner experiences, spiritual quests, family joys and sorrows, as well as countless everyday details that create a sense of presence. This dual nature of the diaries, their apparent simplicity and everyday nature against the backdrop of grandiose historical cataclysms, makes them an incredibly complex but all the more invaluable source. In recent years, with the development of technology, a series of comprehensive expert examinations have been carried out. Handwriting and its changes over time, the chemical composition of the ink, watermarks, and the structure of the paper were studied. Most of these studies confirmed the authenticity of the bulk of the materials. However, some anomalies were also identified. Individual inserts made in a different handwriting, or changes that, according to experts, could have been made after the emperor's death. The analysis of these anomalies is ongoing, and scientists are striving to provide the most honest and objective assessment possible, scrupulously separating irrefutable facts from rumors, myths, and politically biased theories. This scientific approach is becoming the foundation for creating a more complete and accurate historical picture. Along with the technical analysis, a lot of attention is being paid to contextual analysis and comparing diary entries with other independent sources, official documents, diplomatic correspondence, letters from the royal family themselves, and eyewitness accounts. This allows us to identify inconsistencies, confirm the authenticity of the events described, and form a comprehensive, balanced view of the legacy of the last imperial family. Thus, questions of authenticity and falsification remain one of the central and most intriguing topics in the study of Nicholas II's diaries, requiring researchers to have not only deep knowledge but also the qualities of a true detective, capable of unraveling the most complex web of historical mysteries. The study of Nicholas II's diaries inevitably touches upon the broad and multifaceted theme of the influence of such personal documents on the political and cultural memory of society. In the turbulent history of 20th century Russia, the diaries of the last monarch became not just a personal testimony, but a real arena for the clash of ideologies, a battlefield for the country's past. Virtually every new era and every political regime attempted to interpret the fate of Nicholas II and his writings in its own way, in accordance with its own current needs, fears, and ideals. The Soviet period was characterized by the almost complete denial and denigration of the Tsarist regime. The image of the monarch was deliberately destroyed, portraying him as weak, bloodthirsty, or simply insignificant. In this paradigm, the diaries had no place in official historiography. They were either silenced or quoted selectively, with phrases taken out of context to confirm the official version. For the general public, they virtually disappeared from the cultural field, becoming forbidden almost mystical knowledge, accessible only to a narrow circle of party historians. Studying them was fraught with ideological risks. The situation began to change dramatically in the late 1980s and 1990s. With the beginning of perestroika and the collapse of the Soviet Union, society was gripped by a thirst for historical truth. The opportunity for free scientific analysis arose, triggering an avalanche of interest in previously forbidden topics. The diaries of Nicholas II, along with other documents of the era, were removed from special archives and became public property. Complete, uncensored editions began to appear, which had the effect of a bombshell. For many people who had been brought up on Soviet textbooks, it was a revelation that the Tsar was not only a monarch, but also a human being, a loving husband and father, deeply religious, with his own weaknesses and strengths. The return of the diaries to the public consciousness became a symbol of a broader and painful process of rethinking the entire history of Russia, recognizing its complexity and tragedy. They began to be included in school and university curricula, and documentary films and plays were made based on them. They ceased to be merely a historical source and became an important element in the formation of a new national identity. The canonization of the royal family by the Russian Orthodox Church in 2000 further strengthened this status, making the diaries not only a historical but also a spiritual text for many believers. Thus, Nicholas II's diaries fulfill an important cultural function. They continue to influence the formation of views on history, politics, and even questions of faith. Their study and the debates surrounding them speak not only about the past. They are a dialogue about the present and the future, about the lessons we learn from our history and how we build our collective memory. They serve as a powerful reminder of the fragility of human life against the backdrop of the relentless march of history and the eternal struggle for truth and memory. In the 21st century, technological advances have taken the investigation of historical mysteries, such as the mystery of the missing diaries, to a whole new level. Modern scientific methods and digital tools have radically changed the historian's arsenal, sometimes turning them into operators of sophisticated equipment. Technology has greatly facilitated access to archival materials and greatly expanded the possibilities for their analysis. One of the key technologies has been digital restoration. Using multispectral imaging and computer image processing, scientists can now develop faded or discolored text and read records that have been flooded or damaged by fire. This offers hope for the recovery of information from pages that were previously considered irretrievably lost. Artificial intelligence and neural network methods have made a breakthrough in recognizing and deciphering complex handwriting. Programs trained on thousands of samples of Nicholas II's handwriting are now able to accurately decipher even the most illegible notes made in a hurry or under poor conditions, speeding up transcription and reducing the likelihood of human error. These technologies not only improve reading accuracy, but also enable in-depth graphometric analysis for authenticity verification. Algorithms can compare pressure, tilt, writing speed, and hundreds of other parameters to identify anomalies that indicate possible forgery or insertion by another hand. Forensic analysis of the artifacts themselves has also come a long way. Mass spectrometry can determine the exact chemical composition of ink and paper by comparing them with reference samples from the same period. This helps not only to date a document, but also to identify anachronisms that prove forgery. The creation of global digital archives is another revolutionary achievement. Digitized copies of diaries, letters, photographs, and official documents are now available to researchers anywhere in the world. This removes geographical barriers, enables large-scale comparative research, and promotes international cooperation. Scholars from Russia, Europe, and America can work simultaneously with the same documents, exchanging hypotheses in real time. All this opens up new and exciting horizons for studying the Romanov legacy. With each passing year, the likelihood that an important fragment will be found in a previously unexplored archive and that modern technology will make it possible to read it only grows. Professional technological support is becoming an integral part of modern historical research, transforming it into a dynamic, high-tech discipline capable of answering the most complex questions of the past. An integral and perhaps the most fascinating part of studying the Romanov legacy is the attempt to reconstruct lost pages of diaries and understand their possible content. This work is akin to that of a detective who must piece together a complete picture of a crime from scattered clues and circumstantial evidence. In this case, the crime is a tear in the fabric of history, a gaping void where important evidence should be. Historians use a whole bunch of methods to do this. First, they carefully compare all the related documents they can find. The main sources here are the diaries and letters of other family members, primarily Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna and their children. Their records often echo each other, describing the same events but from different points of view. By comparing these texts, it is possible to assume with a high degree of probability what Nicholas II himself might have written on a given day. For example, if the Empress describes Alexei's illness in detail, and her daughters describe their feelings about it, it is logical to assume that this topic was also reflected in the Emperor's diary. The most valuable sources are the memoirs of people from the immediate circle: tutor Pierre Gouillard, Dr. Eugene Botkin, valet Alexei Volkov, and others. In their memoirs, written after they had emigrated, they often refer to conversations with the Emperor or his mood, which makes it possible to reconstruct not only the outline of events, but also Nicholas's psychological state in his final months. Particular attention is paid to analyzing the stylistic features and vocabulary of the Tsar himself. Having studied thousands of pages of his authentic notes, researchers can model with a certain degree of confidence how he might have described a particular event, what words and phrases he would have used. This method helps to distinguish authentic fragments that may be interspersed in other people's memories from later fabrications. And of course, the search in the archives continues. This work requires enormous patience and luck. Researchers sift through thousands of files in state and private archives around the world in the hope of stumbling upon an unexpected artifact, a letter quoting a lost diary entry, or a report by an official who had access to documents after they were confiscated. There have been cases where previously unknown photographs or notes have been found in the personal archives of descendants of those involved in the events, shedding light on blank spots in history. In this context, Nicholas II's diaries are not a frozen monument to the past, but a living, dynamic object of historical research. The work to reconstruct them is not just a scientific exercise, but an act of restoring historical justice, an attempt to give back a voice to a person at the most tragic moment of his life and the history of the entire country. And every fragment found, every detail confirmed, is a small victory in the long struggle for truth and memory. The story of the disappearance of Nicholas II's diaries in Tobolsk is inextricably linked to the overall tragedy of the last Russian imperial family. It consists of many mysterious and controversial episodes that still provoke heated debate and questions among researchers and the public. After the arrest and exile of the royal family to Tobolsk, the diaries became the most important evidence of the inner world of the emperor and his loved ones. However, in conditions of isolation and constant surveillance, the safety of these documents became increasingly threatened. The first reports of the disappearance or concealment of some of the diaries appeared while the family was still in Tobolsk. The authorities and security forces could seize documents under various pretexts, whether for security reasons or political necessity. There is evidence that in a number of cases, valuable correspondence and records disappeared or were confiscated. Temporary and permanent archives, including those created by the Bolshevik authorities in Tobolsk, were subject to the chaos of organizational centralization and confiscations. Some documents fell into the hands of various authorities, which created confusion and made it difficult to trace their fate. Subsequently, during the transfer of the royal family to Yekaterinburg and in the period after the tragic death of Nicholas II, access to the diaries became even more vulnerable. Many scholars believe that it was during this period that the most valuable parts of the records, which could have opened new pages in history, were finally lost or destroyed. Nevertheless, despite the losses, fragments of the diaries have survived to this day and remain an important historical source. The story of their disappearance remains a mystery that continues to intrigue and inspire researchers. In conclusion, we can say that the diaries of Nicholas II from Tobolsk are a unique historical monument that gives us the opportunity to look at historical events through the eyes of the monarch himself. Despite the tragic outcome and the mysterious disappearance of some of the documents, the diaries continue to live on in the public consciousness and in research as a symbol of an era and a personality. Their loss is not just the disappearance of pages of paper, but the loss of a part of historical memory that could play a key role in understanding the last months of the Russian Empire. The ongoing search and research in archives, analysis of surviving fragments, and reconstruction of lost pages are all work that brings us closer to the true picture of those events. Nicholas II's diaries are not only a source of information, but also a powerful symbol of the struggle for truth, the preservation of dignity, and the memory of difficult historical periods. Their fate reminds us of the importance of treating our historical heritage with care, and of the need for a relentless search for the truth. The story of the disappearance of the diaries from Tobolsk remains one of the most intriguing and complex mysteries of 20th century Russian history. It continues to inspire new generations of historians, archivists, and researchers to search for and uncover the secrets of the past, and serves as a reminder of the fragility of historical memory and the value of every historical document.